Welcome back to what we're calling Finance Focus, the 6-part series where I'm joined by Ross Sardi, our CEO, by Jared Morris, CEO and founder of Bolden. Our job is to talk to you about all things finance and finance technology, fintech, if you will. We've already covered in episode 1 and 2, essentially the changing role of finance, the difficulties around driving ROI and how to change that. And today we're going to talk about building the right tech stack. To start off with, I'm going to, well, not just the right tech stack actually. What we're doing is we're talking about the problems that people are having with the current tools they're using and whether or not they enable accurate forecasting and measurements of those ROIs. So we're going to find out what the common problems are and the best way to solve them with the tools that are now available and the integration between those tools. Jared, starting with you, what you work with businesses, you go in, you essentially act as their outsourced finance role, right? And you, at the heart of your business, is using technology to drive finance outcomes. What do you typically see when you go into a business in terms of the problems they have with their tool set?
It often stems from a statement from an executive or a founder or even a board member that is, there has to be a better way. It's often a derivative of a gut feeling more than anything else, or feedback from employees that they are frustrated in a process. I think the core of the problem tends to be a tech stack that isn't well integrated, where you end up inevitably putting a person as the stopgap where a workflow or a process breaks down.
Okay, so manual entry and having to look at a range of systems to get the complete picture.
Yes, and just to elaborate on that, because I think you've picked up on a really good point there, it's also where the same data is entered on multiple occasions.
So there's no authoritative source, there's no single input. Okay. So
probably the other thing I think that the symptom you often see is like you said, the frustration from other staff is I have to ask for stuff instead of having access to it, and it's some who knows how long turnaround time to get stuff back, rather than the sort of live self-service reporting, and that's kind of what I hear in terms of the symptoms from others outside the finance team.
Or I might even go one step further and just a flat-out remark that I do not trust this data.
Right. Yeah, okay.
That's pretty key. Yeah, okay. Yep. Is this even right? Okay. So in that scenario, when you have got those things, you've got the fact that multiple entry points, no single source of truth, people where workflow should be. The result is what? I mean, we sort of talked about it in previous episodes, but to sort of succinctly cover it again, you cannot be sure about your forecast. You can't be sure about purchasing decisions. What are the actual just problems, structural problems ultimately that come off the back of that, those particular issues?
Bad decisions. Yeah. Like ultimately, I think that it's either bad or slow, and slow often means bad. So, I'm always very keen to push decision making, even if you don't have all the perfect information. But the more information you do have, the more insight you do have, at least the better that decision can be. But fast decision, I think, is becoming increasingly important. Things seem to be going. We have this feeling that things are happening faster, I think. And so, that for me is why these things exist, fast decisions.
And that's, again, at the heart of this, the reason why we're having this conversation is the role of finance is changing because the environment within which it lives is also changing. Like you say, things are moving faster. AI, of course, got to talk about AI, it's a thing. So new ways of doing things, but also more pressure to do things and do them fast and make sure you can understand that return. So when you go into these businesses, what does their current fintech stack? I don't know why I feel so weird saying that word, but I feel cheesy or unqualified to use it. Not sure, both. What are they doing currently? Like, obviously it'll vary, but just give me some examples.
This might be controversial, but such is my nature. But a lot of the work that we're doing at the moment is taking businesses off of legacy ERPs. And so there is a growing frustration, I think, in terms of how an ERP is sold, what is required from an implementation point of view, and the fact that typically those systems are managed by the providers that implement it, which doesn't make them particularly agile. And the business, to your point, Ross, struggles to make timely decisions because they frankly just can't build or generate the reports they need to be able to make those timely decisions. Probably the other symptom that we see is a particularly frustrated workforce. You can see it culturally almost immediately, the fact that people are challenged and there's disharmony across the different business units as well, and it makes it very hard to ultimately execute on what is a vision for that business.
Yeah, look, ERPs, I mean, generally, again, maybe stereotyping, or over generalizing, but they do a lot of things, none of them really well. They need a lot of effort to get them from being a platform into something usable, and they don't integrate well and play nice as much. They generally have ecosystems around them, but they can be a little closed in terms of getting to the data that you want as well, right?
And expensive.
Yeah. And needing an expert internally to drive them generally as well, right?
Correct. We spoke to adoption as well, and I think they are generally one of the harder platforms to achieve adoption.
Looking forward to having the adoption chat in the next episode and diving into that. But let's go all in on ERPs then and alternatives. When a business has typically taken on whatever type of ERP, what have they been sold on? Why did they initially choose that, and why does that no longer hold true?
I laugh because I've literally asked myself this question just as a curious business person, because I think if you could tap the mindset of the ERP salesperson, you'd be unbelievably successful in your business as well, because I haven't been able to achieve that clarity of thought in terms of what it is that they are ultimately selling. And maybe that's because I have a bias towards a tech stack of best-in-class apps that are very carefully integrated. But I can't honestly answer that for you, Brendan. I don't know what it is that they've been sold on other than a single platform to manage your entire operations.
Yeah, I probably maybe not as extreme a view, but I think it's what you touched on at the end. It is the core. So this is the ERP is generally seen as the source of truth, right? Like that in most organizations, the ERP system is the place that data lives, right? And I think that they try to then make the platforms as capable as possible. Capable often means complex. And needing to be heavily customized per business. Yeah. But that's generally been the pitch, is that it is going to be the place that you're going to be able to go for everything. And probably when APIs weren't as prevalent and applications weren't as open, you needed a central core that was really capable and somewhat extensible. Like you could mold it and that kind of thing. We've kind of switched, right, in the last, I don't know how many years ago now, but we've kind of switched to this single applicator that do one thing really, really well. And we've gone this spectrum of, now I've got 47 apps in my stack and they all do one thing and I got to make them talk to each other. And I think we're probably actually coming back a little bit from that now and finding a now nice, happy middle ground in between, because we've got the ability to do things now where, independent of all the applications, we can go and actually house our data wherever we want and actually build our own place that is the source of truth and then build our analytics around that. So that's certainly what I'm seeing more and more of.
Yeah, and I think a lot of what I encourage my clients to think about is this distinction between business operations and finance operations, and this idea that finance is chiefly responsible for the general ledger, but business units can be responsible for the sub-ledgers as well. And that really what we require from a finance perspective is that data making its way into a general ledger. But there isn't a reason why you can't empower business units to be responsible for their sub-ledger data.
Okay. I just want to touch on the ERP sort of end of what spells the end of ERPs, at least for businesses in the 50 to 200 seat range, before I go on to what a good alternative looks like. So is it fair to say that ERPs are under a lot of pressure because of the increasing ability to integrate multiple disparate platforms via API, but also because the advent of AI puts their licensing model at risk? It becomes more of a consumption expectation from the market?
Oh, look, I think I see some still doing quite well, and I see some businesses still using them quite well, especially when there is a product that has a deep market specialization or niche, and they're really good at that, and they understand the workflow of that business, and it's quite...
It's like maybe doctors, that kind of thing?
Yeah, you've got certain types of businesses where and you've got a lot of ecosystems that are built around that, in that environment. So I think those are the use cases I certainly see. I think the big generalist ones, your Salesforce and Dynamics and all, right then, but even the kind of mid-range ones, they still have their place, don't get me wrong. Like they're very powerful platforms. I'm not seeing them as much in the size of businesses that you're talking about. Yeah.
I think that's right. Like, I think the reason that we're seeing the shift is the fact that we haven't had the tools in that bracket for a long period of time. There was platforms that was perceived to support a smaller business. The ERPs were tailored a little bit more towards the enterprise level, and there wasn't a kind of stack that sat in that genuine middle market. But that's changing, and that's what I think is quite exciting, and that's what's opening up that opportunity for disruption and potentially the move away from the more traditional ERP.
Let's talk carefully curated tech stack. What can that look like? And you talked about sort of business units before. What can it look like, and how have you seen it done really well? And to what extent can a single business use multiple platforms?
This is a potentially loaded question, and a huge part of what we do is advocate for mapping of process before we look at any implementation. In fact, implementation is always a phase 2 scoped separately engagement for us, because we don't know what problem it is that we're trying to solve from the outset, and the majority of times these businesses don't either. And so we run a digital discovery process right up front to attach that initiative to the ultimate vision of that business and their strategic endeavor. And then we work with the business units to map that existing process, look for those opportunities, but then curate a stack that we know can be fully integrated. And by that, we're talking about this holy grail of single source of data entry, so that people are only having to enter data once. It's making its way through that full stack and then being output, but again, in support of a decision that you've already defined or decided as a part of that discovery process. And so for me, it's about best-in-class apps then that support a very specific process. You're looking at a return on investment as well as maybe an impact and effort assessment too, because there may be an instance where an ERP makes a lot of sense from a kind of business case perspective. But I think what is truly unique about the space that we're now starting to contemplate is just how accessible these apps are from a cost perspective, and how easy it is to integrate those natively. We're not even talking about some of the potential that exists through APIs or even the N8Ns or makes of the world supporting those automated workflows. We're talking native integration of these apps now.
Okay, tick box. Okay.
Correct.
All right. Can you give me an example, a hands-on, like just an actual names and software types of a business you've worked with that's adopted that sort of curated stack? I'm keen to understand how many systems it might involve for a business of 1 to 200 seats.
Yep.
What have you seen work well across multiple platforms?
Yeah, I should clarify that I'm at risk of being a little bit biased owing to the fact that I've sat on the Xero advisory board in the past, but we've done
flex. That's fine.
No, not intended that way.
We get it. You're going to get a job.
Ecosystem. Owing to the app marketplace, in honest truth, just the fact that it does make so many best-in-class apps so easy to integrate into that as a beautiful general ledger, if nothing else, and it kind of supports that distinction I made earlier between a sub-ledger and a general ledger. But a very specific example was a client that has acquired a number of businesses recently as well. They were in the apparel space, and they had a very, very legacy verging on ERP system to manage their inventory and point of sales platform. But this was the throwaway comment that I just don't believe the output from this environment. And so we went to Xero as a cloud accounting platform. We put Unleashed in as an inventory management platform. We looked at Lightspeed as a point of sales platform. We built out an e-commerce capability using Shopify, and then we brought all of that together using a strategic finance platform called Causal to drive some of the management reporting and business case development, scenario analysis, managerial reporting, dashboarding, so that we could keep that finger on the pulse.
Okay. Right. That's similar in a way to your approach, right? You've got a number of apps that, again, you base every particular use case around and then bring them together.
Yeah, and I think you do need to pick those couple of big-ish items, like they said, the choice of Xero, and then there's going to be a heap that plugs into that. And for us, the use of ConnectWise as the PSA, and there's a bunch of stuff that plugs into that. So, people are often surprised when they say, "Oh, you guys are you're still on Xero." Like, well, yeah, because
it's the job.
It's actually a really big ecosystem, and we use Causal as well now for some of the consolidation of multiple entities. It's some of the stuff that Xero doesn't do out of the box. But look, I think it's the right approach. I've worked with a client on Unleashed before as well. It's again from inventory perspective. So these modern cloud apps are actually super easy to use in comparison. You don't need to have as much technical ability to run and maintain them long term. And you
can be nimble, right? If one doesn't work out, you don't have to scrap the whole lot. You can make incremental changes.
Yeah, and you want to try it, you go to the website, you start it, you try it out. I don't like this, I turn it off, right? It's not, I need to sign a 5-year deal for something and all this, and then I work out 18 months in that it's, so you can be a lot more adaptable. I think the downside is you don't want to have people have to go from this app to this app to this app to this app, and that's where I think you want ideally to have certain roles in the business that they understand. That's where, like, even for us, the technical team, they kind of live here, and the bit that sits through the apps that wrap around that versus a finance team, which kind of they live over here, and so I think that app bloat is something I hear about as well. I have to learn 26 apps and all this stuff is everywhere. And so bringing that all together and making it a little bit easier from a staff adoption perspective.
That is exactly why we do the process mapping as well, Ross, and why we discern between business operations and finance operations, because there is a person most likely in your business that will raise a sales order, and they need to know that workflow particularly well. Similarly, someone might raise a purchase order on the flip side, and there'll be a workflow that's attached to that. And so through a swim lane format, you can start to assign roles to workflows. And then when you're doing the vendor selection, you can actually start to tick those off. Now, because you're operating in an environment that's curated and potentially best in class, you then just acknowledge the gaps in the workflow that need to be manual. And you kind of then look at that from a finance perspective in contemplation of the return on investment. But you then acknowledge that you've automated X% of your workflow to free up Y capacity to deliver the Z result in the plan. But then you're also accepting that actually, given the comparative cost of running this stack versus an ERP, we're happy to accept that manual effort in process.
Yeah, it's interesting.
And then using that example, you might have said someone entering sales orders in their app, but then some other person in another department consuming that information through another app, right? Because they're actually all integrated and the data actually syncing across.
Yep.
And
so who's doing the bill matching to the purchase order, or who's doing the accounts receivable function to say that debt has been paid? Like, it's right, it's that single source of data entry, but also knowing your lane, knowing your role, and ensuring that system serves the broader business.
Nice. I reckon that's where we're going to have to leave this episode because we've run over time. So at this point, based on all 3 episodes, if you've watched all of them, you should understand why the role of finance is changing, how to accurately forecast, how to map out the return on your tech spend, and now how to build your tech stack, your fintech stack. Next episode, we're going to be looking at how the adoption rate within your business and potentially by your clients is the real multiplier when landing that return on investment. So join us for episode 4 in 2 weeks.